A billionaire disguised as a nobody walked into his own restaurant and ordered the most expensive steak on the menu. He was mocked, threatened, and quietly set up for something far worse. The manager ordered spoiled meat served to him. A waitress risked everything to slip him a note that stopped him cold. But here is what no one in that room knew. The man in the faded hoodie and torn jeans was Keanu Reeves, one of the most famous actors on the planet, worth $400 million. And the waitress who saved his life was the daughter of his dead best friend. Neither of them knew it yet. The clothes Keanu Reeves wore that evening were not a costume. They were just his clothes. A faded black hoodie with a small hole near the left elbow, worn blue jeans that had seen 1,000 rides on his motorcycle and 1,000 mornings making coffee in a quiet kitchen, brown boots scuffed and softened by years of honest wear. His hair hung loose past his shoulders, dark brown streaked with silver, uncombed and unbothered. His beard was thick and unkempt, the kind that made strangers cross the street. This was not a disguise. This was Keanu Reeves on any given Tuesday, the man who had earned $400 million and still rode the subway, still sat on park benches eating sandwiches alone, still wore the same hoodie until the fabric gave up and surrendered. The world's most famous actor had spent decades perfecting the art of being invisible, and tonight, that invisibility was exactly what he needed. His assistant, Claire Mitchell, stood by the door of his apartment, watching him with barely concealed concern. She had worked for him for 12 years and had seen him make decisions that shifted entire industries. But this was different. This felt dangerous. "You could send someone else," she said. "A professional inspector. Someone trained for this kind of thing." Keanu looked at her through the mirror as he ran his fingers through his tangled hair. "No one can see what I need to see, Claire." The anonymous letter had arrived 6 days ago. No return address. Just a short video clip and 3 sentences typed on plain paper. The video showed a man in ragged clothes being dragged out of a restaurant by 2 security guards while well-dressed customers laughed and raised their wine glasses. The letter read, "The Meridian, your restaurant. Your responsibility. Or is it not?" The Meridian was the worst-performing location in his restaurant chain. The quarterly reports blamed it on the neighborhood, the economy, the changing demographics. But Keanu had not built this business on quarterly reports. He had built it on a promise made to a dying friend. 15 years ago, Keanu and his best friend Jack Holloway had opened the first Meridian together. Jack was a chef, a true artist with food, a man who believed that a perfect meal could heal a broken heart. Keanu was the money, the silent partner. The man whose name never appeared on any paperwork because he did not want fame contaminating what they were building. Their shared philosophy was carved into a small wooden plaque that hung in the kitchen of every location. Every person who walks through the door deserves to be treated with dignity. Jack had come up with those words. Jack, who had grown up poor in Baltimore, who had learned to cook in his grandmother's kitchen because there was never enough food, and he wanted to make what little they had taste like love. Jack, who had spent 20 years in professional kitchens, being screamed at, humiliated, and burned, literally and figuratively, by men who confused cruelty with leadership. 5 years ago, Jack died. Pancreatic cancer. 4 months from diagnosis to funeral. Keanu had sat beside his bed every day for those 4 months, canceling films, ignoring his agent, letting the world spin without him. On the last night, Jack had grabbed Keanu's hand with fingers that felt like paper and said, "Promise me something. Promise me the restaurants stay open. Promise me every person who walks through those doors gets treated the way they deserve. Promise me, Keanu." Keanu had promised, and Keanu Reeves did not break promises. Not ever. But someone was breaking that promise for him. Someone inside his own restaurant was treating people like garbage, and Keanu needed to see it with his own eyes. Not through reports. Not through inspectors. With his own eyes. He removed his watch. slipped his wallet into a drawer. The only thing he kept was a small phone hidden in a compartment he had carved into the sole of his boot, capable of recording audio and making one emergency call. He had built the compartment himself in his workshop, the same workshop where he built motorcycles, because Keanu Reeves was the kind of man who could build anything with his hands. "Please take security," Claire said. One last attempt. Keanu stopped at the door. He looked down at his right hand. The scar was still there, faded but permanent, running across his palm and down to his wrist. He had carried it since he was 19 years old, since a chef in a Los Angeles restaurant had poured hot cooking oil on his hands for daring to eat scraps from a plate that had been sent back. He had been 19, hungry, alone, washing dishes for minimum wage in a kitchen that smelled like money he would never have. He had reached for a piece of steak left on a returned plate, and the head chef had seen him. The man had not yelled, had not fired him. He had simply picked up a pan of hot oil and poured it over Keanu's outstretched hand. Slowly, deliberately, while 3 other cooks watched and laughed. "Rats eat garbage," the chef had said. "If you want to eat like a rat, I will treat you like a rat." Keanu had screamed. The oil had burned through skin and memory, branding itself into his body and his soul. He had stumbled out the back door, clutching his ruined hand, and collapsed in the alley behind the dumpsters. No one followed him. No one helped. No one asked if he was okay. He had wrapped his hand in a torn piece of his own shirt and walked 3 miles to a free clinic where a nurse with kind eyes had bandaged him and said, "Honey, you need to report this." He never did. He was 19 and undocumented in the system that was supposed to protect him. He had no proof, no witnesses willing to speak, no power of any kind. He had only his burned hand and a promise he made to himself that night, sitting on the curb outside the clinic with gauze wrapped around his fingers and tears drying on his face. "If I ever have power," he had whispered to no one, "I will use it to make sure no one is ever treated this way again. Not in any place that belongs to me." 41 years later, standing in his apartment doorway, the scar burned with phantom pain. 35 years ago, he said to Claire, no one protected me, and no one is protecting the people walking into that restaurant right now. That is why I have to go alone. Claire nodded. She had heard the story before. She understood. I will be parked across the street with the legal team. One signal from that phone and we are inside in 30 seconds. Keanu allowed himself a small smile. That is why I keep you around. He climbed into the rusted 2009 Ford F-150 that had once belonged to his best friend, Tommy Mitchell. The truck he kept from another life, another promise. The transmission made that grinding sound as he shifted into third. He never fixed it. He would never fix it. At 7 o'clock on a Saturday evening, the Meridian was alive with the sound of clinking glasses and murmured conversations. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over white tablecloths, and the scent of seared beef and expensive wine hung in the air. The clientele was exactly what you would expect. Men in designer suits, women draped in jewelry, all of them paying $200 a plate for the privilege of being seen in the right place. Grace Holloway had worked there for 3 years, long enough to know that the gleaming surface hid something rotten underneath. She moved between tables with practiced efficiency, refilling water glasses and clearing plates, invisible in the way that service workers were supposed to be. Her feet ached from standing since noon, but she could not afford to slow down. Her 7-year-old daughter, Emma, had another doctor appointment next week, and the copay for her asthma medication had gone up again. Her younger brother Daniel's college tuition was due at the end of the month. Grace was 32 years old, a black woman with her hair pulled back in a tight bun, dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide, and hands that never stopped moving. She had learned long ago to read people by their eyes. It was a survival skill from a childhood spent navigating spaces where she did not belong. She could tell within seconds whether a customer would tip generously or stiff her, whether they saw her as a person or just part of the furniture. Her father had taught her that. Jack Holloway, the greatest chef she had ever known, and the gentlest man. He used to sit her on the kitchen counter when she was little and let her taste everything he was making. "Food is love, Gracie," he would say. "Every plate that leaves this kitchen is a letter to a stranger, telling them they matter." Jack had died 5 years ago. Grace had been 27, already a single mother, already struggling. She had not known that her father had founded a restaurant chain with a silent partner. She had not known that the Meridian, the restaurant where she worked for tips and endured humiliation, was the restaurant her father had helped build. Jack had kept that part of his life separate, wanting Grace to find her own path. He had died before he could tell her the truth. All Grace knew was what her father had told her every night before bed. Dignity is not a privilege, Gracie. Dignity is a right. And what her mother, Ruth Holloway, had whispered on her deathbed when Grace was 24, already pregnant with Emma, already abandoned by the man who had promised to stay. "Baby girl, there is going to come a time when doing the right thing means losing everything. But if you do not do it, you will lose yourself. And that is worse. That is always worse." When the front door opened and a disheveled man walked in, Grace saw immediately that something was wrong. Not with him, with everyone else. He was unkempt, yes. His clothes were worn and wrinkled, his beard wild, his hair hanging loose past his shoulders. He carried the look of someone who had not slept in a proper bed recently. But his posture was wrong. His shoulders were too straight, his stride too confident, and his eyes, dark and watchful, taking in every detail of the room. Those were not the eyes of a man who had been defeated by life. Those were the eyes of someone who used to know what defeat felt like and had sworn never to feel it again. The hostess tried to block him at the entrance, her smile frozen in professional horror. The security guard moved closer, hand already reaching for his radio. And then Bradley Connor appeared. Bradley had been the manager of the Meridian for 5 years. He was 42 years old, lean and sharp-featured, with perfectly styled brown hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. He wore his authority like a weapon, wielding it against anyone he deemed beneath him, which was almost everyone. He was charming to corporate executives and investors, but Grace had seen the way he spoke to bus boys and dishwashers when he thought no one was watching. The cruelty was casual and practiced, the kind that comes from a man who learned early that the only way to survive was to make sure someone else was always lower than you. "Sir," Bradley said, his voice dripping with false politeness, "I am afraid you have made a mistake. This establishment may not be suitable for your current situation." The man did not flinch. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick wad of cash. More money than Grace made in a month. "Table 7, he said calmly. "The Wagyu A5, medium rare. I will pay in advance." A ripple of shock went through the room. Bradley's smile flickered, caught between greed and disgust. He could not refuse a paying customer. That was rule number 1 in the hospitality industry. But every instinct was screaming at him to throw this man out. "Of course," Bradley said through gritted teeth. "Right this way." He led the man to the worst table in the restaurant. Tucked in a corner near the kitchen doors and the restroom hallway, where the noise was loudest and the smell occasionally drifted in from the garbage bins outside. It was the table they used for customers they wanted to humiliate into leaving. The man sat down without complaint. His eyes moved slowly around the room, cataloging everything. The placement of the cameras, the body language of the staff, the hierarchy of cruelty that was invisible to customers but obvious to anyone who had ever worked in a place like this. Bradley turned and scanned the floor. His eyes landed on Grace. "You," he said. You are always talking about helping people in need. Here is your chance." It was meant as punishment. They both knew it. Grace walked to the table, water pitcher in hand, and poured a glass without meeting the man's eyes. But when she set it down, she felt him watching her. She looked up. His eyes caught hers. Dark brown, warm, intelligent. And in that moment, something passed between them. Recognition, maybe? Or understanding. She could not name it, but it made her skin prickle with unease. There was something about those eyes. Something familiar. Something that reminded her of someone she had loved very much. This man was not who he appeared to be. In the kitchen, Bradley pulled the sus chef aside. Danny Morrison was 28 years old and had been working at the Meridian for 2 years. He was good at his job, talented enough to run his own kitchen someday, but he had a wife at home, Sarah, who was 7 months pregnant, and a stack of medical bills that kept him chained to this place. Bradley led him to a corner where the security cameras could not reach. His voice dropped to a whisper. "The Wagyu for the homeless guy. Use the one that got sent back yesterday. The one that sat out for 2 hours before we put it back in the freezer." Danny felt his stomach drop. "Bradley, that steak is compromised. If he eats it, the bacteria alone could what? Give him a stomach ache." Bradley laughed softly. Who is going to believe a homeless man over a 5-star restaurant? He probably eats out of dumpsters anyway. Consider it a favor. This might be the best meal of his life. But if he gets seriously sick... Bradley's expression hardened. "Remember that $2,000 bottle of Burgundy you dropped last month. The one I said I would handle so it would not come out of your paycheck." He let the threat hang in the air. "Just do what I tell you, Danny. Unless you want to start explaining to your pregnant wife why you are unemployed." Danny stood frozen, caught between his conscience and his fear. The image of Sarah sitting at the kitchen table, hand on her belly, calculating numbers that never added up. The nursery they had not finished, the crib still in its box. Finally, he nodded. Bradley patted him on the shoulder. "Good man." Neither of them noticed Grace standing behind the spice rack, close enough to hear every word. Her heart was pounding so hard she was certain someone would hear it. She pressed herself against the wall, barely breathing. The conversation played on repeat in her mind. Compromised meat. 2 hours at room temperature. Bacteria. Who is going to believe a homeless man? Danny turned and nearly collided with her. Their eyes met. She saw the guilt written across his face. He knew she had heard. He shook his head slowly, a silent warning. "Do not do anything. Do not say anything. Forget what you heard." Then he walked away, leaving Grace alone with a choice that could cost her everything. If she stayed silent, she would keep her job. She would pay for Emma's medicine and Daniel's tuition. She would survive. If she spoke up, no one would believe her. Bradley would destroy her reputation and fire her on the spot. She would lose everything she had spent years building. But if she did nothing, that man was going to eat poisoned food. And whatever happened to him would be on her hands. Grace walked back to the dining floor on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Her hands trembled as she picked up a tray of empty glasses. She glanced toward table 7. The man sat there quietly, studying the menu as if he had all the time in the world. He did not look like someone about to be poisoned. He looked like someone waiting for something. The cameras. Grace's eyes flicked upward to the small black domes mounted in the corners of the ceiling. There were 6 of them covering the main dining area, plus 2 near the entrance and 1 pointing at the bar. Bradley reviewed the footage every night, looking for any excuse to dock wages or write up employees. Last month, he had fired a busboy for taking a 5-minute break that was not authorized. The cameras saw everything. If she approached the man and warned him out loud, Bradley would know within hours. She would be fired before sunrise, blacklisted from every restaurant in the city. But if she stayed silent, that man could end up in the hospital. Or worse, the staff bathroom. It was the only room in the building without surveillance. Bradley had complained about it once, saying he wanted cameras everywhere, but the owner had refused, citing privacy laws. That was where she could write something down, something small enough to hide in the curve of her palm. Before she could move, Bradley appeared at her elbow. His presence was like a cold draft. "You have been standing here for 3 minutes," he said, his voice low and pleasant, the way it always was when he was about to say something cruel. "Is there a problem?" Grace forced herself to meet his eyes. "No problem. Just organizing the station." Bradley's gaze drifted toward table 7. "I noticed you looking at our special guest quite a lot. I was just checking if he needed anything." "He does not need anything." Bradley leaned closer. Grace could smell his cologne, something expensive that always made her slightly nauseous. "He is going to eat his meal, realize he does not belong here, and leave. That is the plan." "Understood." Grace nodded. "Good." Bradley smiled, but his eyes stayed flat and cold. "Do not do anything stupid, Grace. You have a lot to lose." He walked away, stopping to charm a table of regulars, his demeanor transforming instantly into warmth and laughter. Grace watched him go. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. He knew something was off. He was watching her now. She had to be careful. She had to be smart. And she had to move fast. The staff hallway was empty when Grace slipped away. Inside the bathroom, she locked the door and leaned against the sink, taking deep breaths. Her reflection stared back at her. A tired woman in a black uniform, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back so tight it made her temples ache. She looked like someone who had been surviving for so long. She had forgotten what it felt like to live. But she also looked like her mother. The memory came sharp and clear. Ruth on her deathbed, thin fingers wrapped around Grace's hand, voice barely a whisper. "Baby girl, there is going to come a time when doing the right thing means losing everything. But if you do not do it, you will lose yourself, and that is worse. That is always worse." Grace reached into her apron pocket and pulled out her order pad. Her hands shook as she tore off a small piece of paper, no bigger than a matchbook. She found a pen and wrote quickly. "Do not eat. The meat is spoiled. Intentional. They want to hurt you." She read it twice, folded it until it was small enough to hide in the curve of her palm. The paper felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Now came the hard part. Danny was plating the steak when Grace walked back through the kitchen. She saw him hesitate as he placed the meat on the white porcelain dish, his jaw tight with something that might have been guilt. The steak looked perfect, seared to a deep brown, glistening with butter, accompanied by roasted vegetables and a drizzle of reduction sauce. No one looking at it would ever guess what it really was. Grace stopped beside him. "Danny, you know you cannot let this happen." He did not look at her. "I do not know what you are talking about. That steak sat out for 2 hours. You know what that means. Food poisoning at minimum, if he has any underlying health conditions." "Stop." Danny turned to face her. The fear in his eyes was the desperate calculation of a man trying to protect what little he had. "I have a baby coming in 2 months. Sarah cannot work right now. If I lose this job, and if that man dies, can you live with that?" Danny's face contorted with anguish. "What do you want me to do, Grace?" "Go out there and tell everyone Bradley ordered me to serve bad meat." "Who is going to believe me? Bradley will deny everything, fire me for lying, and make sure I never work in this industry again." Grace wanted to argue. But looking into his eyes, she understood. He was not a bad person. He was a trapped person, just like her. Just like everyone who worked in places like this, where the people at the top held all the power and the people at the bottom held all the risk. "Fine," she said softly. "You did not see anything. You do not know anything." Relief flooded Danny's face, followed immediately by shame. She had already turned away. She would do this alone. The plate was ready. Grace picked it up from the pass, balancing it on her palm. The steak was still sizzling slightly, sending up wisps of fragrant steam. She walked through the dining room, weaving between tables, her free hand hanging at her side with the folded paper pressed between her fingers. 10 feet. 5. 2. She stopped at the edge of the table and set the plate down gently. Your Wagyu a 5, sir. Medium rare, as requested. The man looked up at her. Again, she felt that strange spark of recognition. His eyes were dark and warm, studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. She had the sudden irrational thought that he could see right through her, that he already knew everything she was about to tell him. She placed the silverware beside the plate. As she did, her hand brushed against his. In that brief moment of contact, she pressed the folded paper into his palm, feeling his fingers close around it instinctively. Enjoy your meal, she said, holding his gaze for just a second longer than necessary. Then she turned and walked away, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain the entire restaurant could hear it. Keanu watched the waitress retreat. His hand closed around the small piece of paper. Her face had been carefully neutral, but her eyes, those dark knowing eyes, had been screaming a warning, and there was something about those eyes that he could not shake. Something that reminded him of Jack. The same sharp intelligence, the same quiet courage, the same refusal to look away from truth. He waited until she was across the room, then casually dropped his hand below the table and unfolded the note. Do not eat. The meat is spoiled. Intentional. They want to hurt you. He read the words 3 times. Then he looked down at the beautiful steak sitting in front of him. The meal that was supposed to make him sick, to punish him for daring to exist in a space where people like him were not welcome. Something cold and hard settled in his chest. It was not anger. Not yet. It was something older. Something he had buried deep inside himself 41 years ago and thought he had forgotten. He remembered being 19, hungry and desperate, reaching for scraps on a plate in a Los Angeles kitchen. He remembered the hot oil, the searing pain, the laughter, the words that had branded themselves into his memory deeper than any scar. Rats eat garbage. The scar on his right hand throbbed with phantom pain. He had built his career, his fortune, his entire life to prove them wrong. He had invested in this restaurant chain so that no one would ever be treated that way in a place that bore his name. That was the promise he had made to himself at 19. That was the promise he had made to Jack on his deathbed. And now, in one of his own restaurants, they were trying to poison a man they thought was homeless. Keanu set down the knife and fork. He would not eat. He would not leave. He would sit here and watch. And when the time was right, he would burn this whole rotten system to the ground and build something worthy on its ashes. 20 minutes passed. The steak sat untouched, growing cold on its plate. Keanu remained in his seat, occasionally sipping water, his eyes moving slowly around the room. From behind the bar, Bradley watched with growing unease. The man should have eaten by now, should have been halfway through the meal, already feeling the effects of bacteria multiplying in his stomach. Instead, he just sat there, calm and still, like he was waiting for something. Bradley smoothed down his tie and walked over to table 7. His customer service smile firmly in place. Is everything all right with your meal, sir? You have not touched it. The man looked up at him. There was something in his expression that Bradley could not quite read. Something that made him feel like he was the one being evaluated rather than the other way around. The atmosphere? The man said. I am enjoying it. Bradley's smile flickered. I see. Well, if there is anything wrong with the food, I would be happy to have the kitchen prepare something else. The food looks perfect. The man's eyes held Bradley's without blinking. I am just savoring the moment. Something was wrong. Bradley could feel it, that prickling sensation at the back of his neck that had saved him from trouble more times than he could count. This man was too confident, too calm, too controlled. He did not behave the way a homeless person should behave. Bradley glanced across the room to where Grace was refilling water glasses. She had served him. She had been alone with him for a few seconds. Had she said something? Done something? He would deal with her later. Right now, he needed to get this man out. The confrontation came 30 minutes later. A woman at a nearby table, Patricia Langford, draped in diamonds and designer clothes, waved Bradley over with an imperious gesture. Her husband Richard sat beside her, looking embarrassed but unwilling to intervene. "This is unacceptable," Patricia hissed. "We are paying $400 for dinner, and we have to sit near that." She gestured toward Keanu with unconcealed disgust. "The smell alone is ruining my appetite." Bradley nodded sympathetically. "I completely understand, Mom. Let me handle this." He walked back to table 7, his stride more purposeful now, his smile replaced by a business-like expression. "Sir, I am afraid I need to ask you to leave. We have other guests who require this table." Keanu looked up calmly. "I have paid for my meal. I will refund your money in full." "I do not want a refund. I want to sit here." Bradley felt his patience fraying. Other diners were starting to notice, conversations dying down as heads turned. "Sir, I must insist." "On what grounds?" Keanu's voice was quiet but carried clearly. "I have paid for my food. I am not disturbing anyone. I am simply sitting here in a seat I have paid for, in a restaurant that is open to the public. What law am I breaking?" Bradley opened his mouth and closed it. The man was right. He could not forcibly remove a paying customer without cause, not with this many witnesses. If this turned into a scene, if someone recorded it, the publicity nightmare would be enormous. His eyes found Grace again, and suddenly the solution became clear. If he could not blame the customer, he would blame the staff. Bradley straightened his jacket and raised his voice loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "Grace Holloway, please come here." Grace looked up from across the room. Her face went carefully blank. She set down the water pitcher and walked over, each step slow and deliberate. "Yes." Bradley turned to face her, making sure his expression conveyed righteous disappointment. "I have received complaints that you were inappropriate with this guest, that you made comments that were unprofessional and offensive." Grace's eyes widened. "That is not true. I did not say anything inappropriate." Multiple witnesses, Bradley continued, talking over her, "have reported that you deliberately tried to embarrass this gentleman. In light of this, I have no choice but to suspend you immediately, pending a full investigation." The dining room had gone silent. Every eye was fixed on the confrontation unfolding at table 7. Grace stood frozen, her mouth open in disbelief. Across the room, Danny watched from the kitchen doorway, his face pale with guilt. He knew the truth. He knew Grace had done nothing wrong, that Bradley was lying to cover his own crimes, but he could not speak. His wife, his baby, his future, everything depended on his silence. He lowered his eyes and stepped back into the kitchen. Grace was alone. She stood in the middle of the restaurant, surrounded by strangers watching her humiliation like it was dinner theater. Bradley's words echoed in her ears. Suspended. Investigation. Inappropriate. Each one a nail in the coffin of her career. She thought about Emma at home with the babysitter, probably already asleep, clutching the stuffed bear that Grace's father had given her on the day she was born. The last gift Jack Holloway ever gave. She thought about the stack of medical bills on her kitchen counter. The tuition payment due next week. The carefully constructed life that was crumbling around her. She had done the right thing. She had risked everything to warn a stranger, and now she was being punished for it while the real criminal stood in front of her with a self-righteous smile on his face. Tears burned at the backs of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give Bradley that satisfaction. "I did not do anything wrong," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I served him his food. That is all I did." Bradley shook his head sadly. "The witnesses say otherwise. Please collect your things and leave the premises." We will be in touch about next steps." Grace looked around the room, searching for someone, anyone, who might stand up for her. The other servers avoided her gaze. The customers watched with mild interest, already composing the story they would tell their friends tomorrow. No one moved. No one spoke. She was invisible. She had always been invisible. And then, from the corner table, a voice cut through the silence. She did not say anything inappropriate. Everyone turned to look at the man who was rising slowly from his seat. His posture had changed, his shoulders squaring, his chin lifting. He no longer looked like someone society had discarded. He looked like someone who was used to commanding rooms. "She brought me my food," he continued, his voice calm and clear. "She was polite and professional. That is all." Bradley's expression hardened. "Sir, this is an internal matter?" "No." The word was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. "This is a public accusation made in front of dozens of witnesses. If you are going to fire this woman, you should at least have the decency to do it honestly." Something in his tone made Bradley take a step backward. The man's bearing had transformed completely. The slouch was gone. The deference was gone. What stood before them now was something Bradley had seen only in men who owned things. Real things, companies, buildings, futures. "Who are you?" Bradley demanded. The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I think it is time you found out." Keanu reached down and removed his boot. The diners closest to him recoiled. But instead of what they expected, they watched in confusion as he pulled a small phone from a hidden compartment in the sole. He pressed a single button. Within 30 seconds, the front door of the Meridian swung open. Claire Mitchell walked in first. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor. She was dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, her expression cold and professional. Behind her came two men in dark blazers carrying briefcases, lawyers, and 4 members of a private security team in dark suits with earpieces. They had been waiting in the black SUV, parked across the street, monitoring everything through the open line on Keanu's phone. The restaurant fell into stunned silence. Claire crossed the room and stopped beside Keanu. She turned to address the crowd, her voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption. Allow me to introduce the man standing before you. This is Keanu Reeves, actor, philanthropist, and the founder and sole owner of the entire Meridian restaurant chain." A gasp rippled through the dining room like a wave breaking against a cliff. Patricia Langford turned bone white, her hand flying to her mouth. Her husband Richard stared at Keanu with dawning horror, already calculating the social catastrophe of what they had said and done. Phones came out. Mouths fell open. A woman at table 3 dropped her wine glass and did not notice it shatter on the marble floor. Bradley stood frozen. The color drained from his face in real time, as if someone had opened a valve and let all the blood run out. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked like a man watching his entire world collapse in slow motion. Keanu stepped forward. Even in his faded hoodie and worn jeans, even with his tangled hair and unkempt beard, he carried himself with the unmistakable presence of a man who had built empires from nothing and given most of it away. "I have been recording everything tonight," he said, holding up the phone. "Every word, every interaction, including a very interesting conversation that took place in your kitchen about 45 minutes ago." Bradley's eyes widened. "I do not know what you are talking about." "Really?" Keanu gestured toward the untouched plate on table 7. "Then perhaps you can explain what is wrong with this steak. The one you ordered your sus chef to prepare using meat that had been sitting at room temperature for 2 hours before being refrozen." Murmurs of disgust erupted through the room. Several diners pushed their own plates away, suddenly suspicious of everything they had been served. Bradley shook his head. "That is a lie. I never said anything like that. This is slander." Keanu turned toward the kitchen doorway, where Danny Morrison stood frozen, his face the color of ash. Danny Morrison, you have a choice right now. You can tell the truth about what happened tonight, or I can play the recording and let everyone hear your voice agreeing to serve contaminated food to a customer. Danny did not move. His eyes darted between Keanu and Bradley, trapped between two impossible options. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Think about your wife, Keanu said, his voice softening. Think about your baby. Do you want to be the man who stood by and let this happen? Or do you want to be the man who finally did the right thing? Danny looked at Grace. She stood alone in the middle of the room, her career in ruins, her reputation destroyed, all because she had chosen to warn a stranger instead of protecting herself. She had been braver than him. She had risked everything while he had hidden in the kitchen, too afraid to speak. Danny stepped forward. His voice cracked. Bradley ordered me to use the steak that was sent back yesterday. It had been left out for almost 2 hours before we put it back in the freezer. He said no one would believe a homeless man if he got sick. He said it would teach him a lesson for coming here. The dining room erupted. Customers shouted in outrage, some reaching for phones to call lawyers or journalists. The security team moved to block the exits. Bradley backed away, hands raised. He is lying. This is a conspiracy. I have worked here for 5 years. I would never. The recording does not lie. Keanu interrupted, and neither do the financial records my team has been reviewing for the past week. Embezzlement. Falsified inventory reports. Systematic theft from this restaurant for years. Did you really think no one would notice? Bradley's facade crumbled. The charming, confident manager disappeared, replaced by a cornered, desperate man. He turned and tried to run, but 2 security team members caught him before he reached the door. You cannot do this to me, Bradley screamed, struggling against their grip. I will sue you. I will destroy you. You have no idea who you are dealing with. Keanu walked toward him slowly. Stop 3 feet away. The screaming stopped. Something about the way Keanu stood there, quiet and still, made Bradley go silent. 41 years ago, Keanu said softly, a man poured hot oil on my hands because I was hungry and desperate. He laughed while I screamed. He told me I was a rat, that I deserved to suffer for being poor. He held up his right hand, showing the faded scar that crossed his palm and ran down to his wrist. I built this company so that no one would ever be treated that way in a place that belonged to me. My best friend Jack Holloway and I made a promise. Every person who walks through the door deserves to be treated with dignity. His voice broke slightly on Jack's name, and you turned his restaurant into exactly the kind of place we swore to destroy. Bradley stared at him. All the fight drained from his body. His shoulders slumped. His head dropped. The police are on their way, Claire announced. Mr. Connor will be facing charges for attempted poisoning, embezzlement, and fraud. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. And then Grace said something that stopped Keanu's heart. Did you say Jack Holloway? Keanu turned to look at her. Really look at her. The intelligence in her dark eyes. The stubborn set of her jaw. The way she held herself even when the world was trying to break her. Straight, backed, and unbroken. Jack Holloway was my father, Grace said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. He was a chef. He grew up in Baltimore. He died 5 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. The room had gone silent again. But this was a different kind of silence. Not shock, not scandal. Something deeper. Something sacred. Keanu stared at her. Your father was Jack Holloway. Wes. Jack who grew up on Fulton Avenue in East Baltimore. Jack who learned to cook in his grandmother Ella's kitchen. Jack who could make a $3 meal taste like it cost $300. Tears filled Grace's eyes. You knew my father. Keanu's voice dropped to almost nothing. I did not just know him, Grace. He was my best friend. For 20 years, he was the closest thing I had to family. We built this restaurant together. He created the menu. I put up the money. We made a promise that every person who walked through these doors would be treated with dignity. He paused. That was Jack's word. Dignity. He said it every single day. Grace pressed both hands to her mouth. The tears came freely now. He said it to me too. Every night before bed. Dignity is not a privilege. Dignity is a right. That is Jack. Keanu's own eyes were wet. Those are exactly his words. He stepped closer. Your father talked about you constantly. Gracie, he called you. He was so proud of you. He wanted to tell you about the restaurants, about our partnership. But he wanted you to find your own way first. He was planning to bring you in, to show you what we had built together. And then the diagnosis came, and there was not enough time. Grace was shaking. I have been working in my father's restaurant for 3 years and I did not know. He would have wanted you to know. He would have wanted you here, not serving tables, running the place, the way he always imagined. Keanu looked at this woman, this brave, exhausted, underpaid woman who had just risked everything she had to save a stranger's life, and he saw Jack Holloway staring back at him through her eyes. The same courage, the same quiet refusal to let fear win, the same belief that doing the right thing was not optional, even when the cost was everything. Your father saved my life once, Keanu said. Not from danger, from despair. I was ready to give up, on acting, on life, on everything. Jack sat me down in his kitchen and cooked me the most beautiful meal I have ever eaten. And he said, you are not done yet, brother. The world needs what you have. And I believed him, because Jack Holloway had this way of making you believe impossible things. Grace wiped her eyes. He made me believe impossible things too. An hour later, the restaurant had emptied. The police had taken Bradley away. The diners had been sent home with refunds and apologies. The staff had been dismissed for the night. Only Keanu and Grace remained. She sat at a table near the window, staring at her hands. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind bone-deep exhaustion. She had done the right thing. She had saved a man's life. And yet she felt hollow, uncertain of what came next. Keanu approached and sat down across from her. He had washed his face in the restroom, though he still wore the same clothes. Up close, without the context of his appearance, she could see him clearly for the first time, the sharp intelligence in his eyes, the kindness, the sadness that never fully left, the kind that comes from losing too many people you love. You knew, he said. When you wrote that note, you knew it could cost you everything. Your job, Emma's healthcare, Daniel's education. Why did you do it? Grace looked up at him. Because my mother told me that doing the right thing sometimes means losing everything. And my father told me that dignity is not a privilege. She paused. And because when I brought you the water and looked into your eyes, I knew those were not the eyes of a homeless man. Those were the eyes of someone who remembered what it felt like to have nothing. Someone who had been where that man on the floor has been. Keanu was quiet. You read people. My father taught me. He said eyes do not lie, clothes lie, wallets lie, resumes lie, but eyes always tell the truth. That sounds exactly like Jack. They sat in silence for a moment, two strangers connected by a dead man's love and a folded piece of paper. What happens now? Grace asked. The restaurant closes for renovations. New management, new staff training, new everything. Keanu leaned forward slightly. And I need someone to lead it. Someone who understands what this place should be. Someone who has the courage to do the right thing, even when it costs everything. Someone whose father built this kitchen with his own hands and his own heart. Grace stared at him. You are offering me a job. I am offering you your father's legacy. This is not charity and it is not a reward. It is what Jack would have wanted. You can take it or leave it. Grace closed her eyes. She saw her father in his white chef coat, flour on his hands, singing while he cooked. She saw her mother on her deathbed, thin fingers wrapped around hers. She saw Emma asleep with the stuffed bear, the last gift from a grandfather she would never remember. I will take it, she said. But I have one condition. 3 months later, the Meridian reopened. The space had been transformed. Same elegant bones, but warmer now, more welcoming. The lighting was softer, the music gentler. The staff trained in a philosophy that Grace had helped develop, built on her father's original words. Every person who walks through these doors deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of how they look or how much money they have. Grace stood near the entrance in a tailored black suit, greeting guests as they arrived. She looked different. Not just the clothes, but the way she carried herself. Her shoulders were straight. Her chin was lifted. Her eyes were clear and confident. She looked like her father's daughter. She looked like a woman who had finally stopped surviving and started living. The door opened and a man walked in. His clothes were worn and dirty, his hair unkempt, his shoes held together with tape. He looked around nervously, clearly expecting to be thrown out. The hostess hesitated, glancing toward Grace. Grace walked forward before anyone else could react. "Welcome to the Meridian," she said warmly, extending her hand. "Would you like a table by the window?" The man stared at her in disbelief, waiting for the catch, the cruel joke, but there was none. "I do not have much money," he admitted quietly. Grace smiled. "That is all right. We have a community menu for guests who need it. Please come in." She led him to a table near the window, the best seat in the house. As she walked back to her post, she passed a new addition to the restaurant's decor. A small frame mounted on the wall near the entrance. Inside was a piece of paper, creased and worn, with cramped handwriting that read, "Do not eat. The meat is spoiled. Intentional. They want to hurt you." Beneath it, a small plaque bore an inscription. "One small act of courage can change everything." This note saved a life and reminded us who we are. Dignity is not a privilege, it is a right. Jack Holloway, founder. Grace Holloway, general manager. To father and daughter, together on one plaque. In the restaurant they had both built without ever knowing it. That had been her condition. And every day, when new employees started their training, they stood before that frame and learned the story of the night everything changed. But the story was not over, because 6 months after that night, something happened that no one expected. Least of all Keanu Reeves. He received a letter, handwritten, postmarked from a county correctional facility. The handwriting was cramped and uneven, as if the person writing had not held a pen in a long time, or as if their hand was shaking. "Mr. Reeves, I know you have no reason to read this. I know I do not deserve your time, but I am writing because I have no one else to write to. My name is Bradley Connor. I was the manager of your restaurant. I was the man who tried to poison a stranger and destroy an innocent woman's life. I was the worst version of a human being, and I need to tell you why." Keanu sat in his small kitchen in Newark. Lily was at school. The house was quiet. He read the letter slowly. "I grew up in the foster care system. 11 families before I was 18. I was moved so many times I stopped unpacking. I stopped remembering names. I stopped believing anyone would keep me. My 4th family was the worst and the best. The worst because my foster father, Gerald, was a restaurant manager who hit me every time I made a mistake. He taught me that the only way to survive was to be in control. If you are not on top, you are on the bottom. If you show weakness, they will eat you alive. He taught me that kindness was stupidity and cruelty was strength. The best because he also taught me how to run a restaurant. It was the only thing I was ever good at. The only thing that ever made me feel like I was worth something. I spent my whole life building walls. I hurt people before they could hurt me. I controlled everything because control was the only thing that kept me safe. I looked at that man, at you, in your old clothes with your messy hair, and I saw everything I was terrified of becoming. I saw someone powerless, someone the world had thrown away. And I needed to destroy that person, because if I did not, I would have to face the fact that underneath my suit and my title and my cologne, I was still that kid, still terrified, still waiting to be moved to the next family. I am not asking for forgiveness. I do not deserve it. I am asking you to understand that I was not born this way. No one is born this way. I was built by hands that should have held me and instead hit me, by a system that should have protected me and instead passed me around like an unwanted package. I am telling you this not as an excuse. There is no excuse. I am telling you because you showed that scar on your hand, and you said someone hurt you when you were young and no one helped. Well, someone hurt me too, and no one helped me either. And instead of building something beautiful like you did, I built something ugly. I became the man with the hot oil. I became the chef who pours pain on people weaker than him. And I am sorry. I am sorry for what I did to that woman. I am sorry for what I did to Danny. I am sorry for what I almost did to you. And I am sorry to Jack Holloway, whose restaurant I destroyed. I read about him after that night. He sounded like the kind of man I wish I had known. The kind of man who might have saved me. Bradley Connor. Keanu sat with the letter for a long time. The kitchen was quiet. The coffee grew cold. Outside, a school bus rumbled past. He looked at the scar on his right hand. The scar that had driven him for 41 years. The scar that had built restaurants and funded foundations and changed lives. But it had never healed. Not really. Because healing required something more than success. It required something Keanu had never been able to give himself. Forgiveness. Not for the chef who burned him. Not for the world that had ignored him. But for himself. For the 19-year-old boy who had believed, for one terrible moment, that maybe the chef was right. That maybe he was worthless. That maybe he deserved it. He had never forgiven that thought. He had only outrun it. And now Bradley Connor, sitting in a cell with nothing left, no job, no family, no identity, was asking Keanu to do the one thing that terrified him more than anything. To look at cruelty and see pain underneath. 2 weeks later, Keanu walked into the county correctional facility. He wore what he always wore, faded hoodie, worn jeans, boots, his hair loose past his shoulders. The guard at the entrance looked at him, looked at his ID, looked at him again, and said nothing. Bradley was waiting in the visitation room. He looked nothing like the man from the Meridian. The sharp suit was gone. The styled hair was gone. The practiced smile was gone. What remained was a thin, pale man with hollow eyes and trembling hands. He looked smaller. Younger, broken. "You came?" Bradley said. He could not keep the shock from his voice. "I did not think you would come." Keanu sat down across from him, said nothing for a long moment. Just looked at him. "Why did you write to me?" Keanu asked. "Because you showed your scar." Bradley's voice was barely above a whisper. "You stood in front of a room full of people, and you showed them the worst thing that ever happened to you. And you did not use it as a weapon. You used it as a bridge." He paused. "No one has ever done that in front of me. No one has ever been honest about being hurt. You were hurt too." It was not a question. Bradley's eyes filled with tears. He pressed his lips together hard, fighting against something that had been locked inside him for decades. "I was 5 years old when I went into the system," he said. "My mother left me at a fire station. She did not even knock on the door. She just set me on the step and walked away. I watched her go. She never turned around." He told Keanu everything. The 11 families. The foster father who hit him. The lesson that cruelty was the only language the world understood. The years of building walls so high that eventually he could not see over them anymore. "I do not know how to be different," Bradley said. "I have never known how. Every time I try to imagine being kind, I hear Gerald's voice telling me that kindness is weakness. That if I let my guard down, someone will hurt me. And I believe him. After all these years, I still believe him." Keanu was silent for a long time. Then he said something that Bradley did not expect. 41 years ago, a man poured hot oil on my hands. And for one moment, I believed him. I believed I was worthless. I believed I deserved it. That moment lasted about 3 seconds. But those 3 seconds shaped my entire life. Every restaurant I built, Every dollar I donated, every promise I kept, I did to prove that moment wrong. He leaned forward. You had more than 3 seconds, Bradley. You had years. Years of being told you were nothing. Years of being taught that the only way to survive was to hurt others before they hurt you. And you believed it. Not because you are evil, because you were a child, and children believe what they are taught. Bradley's tears fell freely now. He did not wipe them away. He did not try to hide them. I cannot give you your job back, Keanu said. I cannot undo what you did. And I cannot tell you that everything is going to be okay, because I do not know that. Then why are you here? Because 41 years ago, no one came. No one sat across from me and said, I see you. I see what happened to you. I see the scared kid underneath the scar. Keanu held up his right hand. No one helped me heal this. I had to do it alone. And it took me 4 decades. I do not want that for you. He placed a business card on the table. When you get out, there is a job waiting for you. Not at the Meridian. Not as a manager. You start from the bottom. Dishwasher at our training facility in Baltimore. Mandatory therapy twice a week. A mentor who has been where you have been. And a chance, Bradley. Just a chance. What you do with it is up to you. Bradley stared at the card. His hands shook. Why? After everything I did. After what I almost did to you. Why would you help me? Because no one helped me when I was 19. And I swore that if I ever had the power, I would use it to build bridges, not walls. He paused. And because my best friend Jack Holloway once told me something that I carry with me every day. He said, the measure of a man is not how he treats the people who can help him. It is how he treats the people who have hurt him. Bradley pressed both hands flat on the table, as if trying to anchor himself to something solid. I do not deserve this. Maybe not. But deserve has nothing to do with it. This is about who I want to be. And I want to be the man who shows up, even when it is hard. Even when the person across from me does not deserve it. Because that is how you break the cycle. One act of grace at a time. 1 year later, Bradley Connor stood in the kitchen of the Meridian's training facility in Baltimore. His hands were red and cracked from hot water and industrial soap. He had been washing dishes for 11 months. Every plate, every pot, every greasy pan. From 5 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. 5 days a week. He had also been in therapy twice a week with a counselor named Margaret who specialized in childhood trauma. The first 3 months, he had sat in her office and said nothing. Absolutely nothing. Margaret had waited. She was patient. She had seen men like Bradley before. Men who had built entire personalities out of scar tissue and survival instincts. She knew that the walls had to come down on their own. You could not force them. In the 4th month, Bradley had told her about the fire station, about watching his mother walk away, about never being unpacked, about Gerald. In the 7th month, he had cried for the first time since he was 5 years old. In the 10th month, he had said the words that Margaret had been waiting for. I do not want to be Gerald anymore. I do not want to be the man with the hot oil. I want to be someone else. But I do not know who that person is. That is exactly where change begins, Margaret had said. Not in knowing who you want to be. In knowing who you do not want to be anymore. Bradley had also started a small group at the facility. Nothing formal. Just a weekly meeting in the break room for young employees who had come from foster care or difficult backgrounds. He called it The Bridge. He told them his story. All of it. The foster homes. The cruelty. The restaurant. The arrest. The letter. The man in the faded hoodie who had shown him a scar and offered him a chance. I was the villain of someone else's story, he told them. And the only reason I am standing here, instead of rotting in a cell, is because someone decided that my worst moment did not have to be my last moment. On a Tuesday morning in March, Bradley drove to the Meridian. He had called ahead. Grace knew he was coming. She had agreed to see him, though she had not agreed to forgive him. He walked in through the front door. The restaurant was closed, but the staff was there, setting up for the evening. Grace stood near the entrance in her black suit, arms crossed, face unreadable. Bradley stopped 10 feet away. He was thinner than before, older looking. His hands were rough from work. He wore simple clothes, nothing expensive, nothing designed to impress. He looked like a man who had been taken apart and was slowly, painfully, putting himself back together. "Grace," he said. His voice was steady, but his eyes gave everything away. "I came to say something I should have said a year ago." Grace said nothing. She waited. "What I did to you that night was unforgivable. I lied about you in front of dozens of people. I tried to destroy your reputation, your career, your livelihood. I did it because you were brave enough to do the right thing, and your bravery made my cowardice visible, and I could not stand it." He paused. His voice cracked. "I also want to say something about your father. I never met Jack Holloway, but I have read about him. I have read his recipes. I have read the letters he wrote to his staff. I have read the philosophy he built this restaurant on. And I want you to know that I am ashamed. I am ashamed that I took something beautiful that your father created, and I turned it into something ugly. He deserved better. You deserved better. Everyone who worked here deserved better." Grace's jaw tightened. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steel. "You almost killed a man, Bradley. You served him poisoned food, and you did not care what happened. You blamed me for your crime. You would have let me lose everything. My job, my daughter's health care, my brother's education, to protect yourself. Yes, and you want me to forgive you?" Bradley shook his head. "No, I do not want you to forgive me. I want you to know that I understand what I took from you. And I want you to know that I am spending every day trying to become someone who would never do what I did. Not for you. For me. Because if I do not change, then the people who broke me win. And I am tired of letting them win." Grace was quiet for a long time. The restaurant hummed with the quiet sounds of preparation. Silverware being placed. Glasses being polished. The kitchen coming to life. Finally, she spoke. "My mother told me something before she died. She said doing the right thing sometimes means losing everything. But she also said something else that I did not understand until right now." She stepped closer. She said, "Forgiveness is not about the person who hurt you. Forgiveness is about setting yourself free. I have been carrying anger toward you for a year. It sits in my chest like a stone, and I am tired of carrying it." She looked him directly in the eyes. "I do not forgive you because you deserve it. I forgive you because I deserve to be free. I forgive you because my father believed that every person who walks through these doors deserves dignity, and that includes you. Even now, even after what you did." Bradley's shoulders began to shake. The tears came silently, running down his face and dripping onto the marble floor. He did not wipe them away. He let them fall. Because for the first time in his life, someone had looked at his worst self and chosen grace instead of punishment. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you, Grace." She nodded once. Then she extended her hand. He took it. The handshake lasted 3 seconds. But in those 3 seconds, something shifted in the universe. Something broke open. Something healed. Danny Morrison was there too. He had come back to the Meridian 6 months ago, after his son was born, after the guilt had eaten him alive, after he had finally told Sarah everything, and she had held him and said, "Then go make it right." He had walked into Grace's office, sat down, and said, "I should have spoken up that night. I should have stood beside you instead of hiding in the kitchen. I was a coward, and I am sorry." Grace had looked at him for a long moment. Then she had said, "You are here now. That counts for something." Danny was now the head chef. He ran the kitchen the way Jack Holloway would have wanted it run, with pride, with precision, with the understanding that every plate that left his station was a letter to a stranger, telling them they mattered. And every morning, before the first order came in, Danny stood before the framed note on the wall and reminded himself what courage looked like. It looked like a woman with nothing to lose writing a message on a scrap of paper because she believed that a stranger's life was worth more than her own safety. 6 months later, Keanu Reeves sat at a table in the Meridian. Not table 7. Table 1, by the window. The best seat in the house. He wore what he always wore, the faded black hoodie, the worn jeans, the boots. His hair was loose and messy. His beard was thick and wild. Grace brought him a plate. Wagyu A5, medium rare, prepared by Danny Morrison with the finest ingredients, the freshest meat, and the kind of care that turns food into art. From the kitchen, Grace said, Danny says to tell you this is how it should have been. Keanu looked at the steak, perfectly seared, glistening, accompanied by roasted vegetables and a drizzle of reduction sauce. He picked up his knife and fork, cut a piece, raised it to his mouth, chewed slowly. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever tasted. Not because of the wagyu, not because of Danny's technique, but because of what it represented. A promise kept, a legacy honored, a broken thing made whole. Grace sat down across from him. Emma was at school. Daniel had graduated college last month, first in his family, and was starting a teaching job in September. Grace's medical bills were paid. Her apartment had a second bedroom now. She had a retirement account. Your father would be proud of you, Keanu said. I know. Grace smiled. It was the smile of a woman who had finally stopped surviving and started living. He told me once that the best meals are the ones shared with people who showed up when it mattered. You showed up, Keanu. You showed up first, he said. I just ate the steak. They laughed. The sound filled the empty restaurant, bouncing off walls that had seen the worst and the best of human nature. Keanu looked at the framed note by the entrance, the cramped handwriting, the small plaque with 2 names, father and daughter. He thought about Jack, about the promise, about the night everything could have gone wrong, but did not. Because a woman with nothing chose courage over safety. Because a sus chef eventually chose truth over silence. Because a broken man in a cell chose to write a letter instead of building another wall. He thought about Bradley, who was now managing the weekend shift at the Baltimore training facility and running the bridge program for foster care youth, who had called Keanu last week to say, a kid came in today, 17, just aged out of the system, scared, angry, exactly like me. And I sat down with him and I told him my story. And I said, you are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to do next. Keanu had hung up the phone and cried, because that was the sentence he had been waiting 41 years to hear. Not from Bradley, from himself. You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to do next. The scar on his right hand would never disappear. The memory of hot oil and laughter and the word, rat, would never fully fade. But it no longer burned. It no longer drove him. It had become something else entirely. A reminder, not of pain, but of purpose. He finished the steak, set down his knife and fork, looked across the table at Grace Holloway, the daughter of his best friend, the woman who had saved his life with a scrap of paper and a mother's courage. Jack used to say something to me, Keanu said. He used to say, the measure of a place is not how it treats the people who pay the most. It is how it treats the person who walks in with nothing. Grace nodded. Said that to me too. Well, Keanu looked around the restaurant, the soft lighting, the warm walls, the framed note, the empty tables waiting to be filled with strangers who would be treated like family. I think he would say we finally got it right. I think so too. Outside, the sun was setting over the city. The light poured through the windows and painted the white tablecloths in gold. Somewhere in Baltimore, a man who had been the villain of this story was sitting across from a scared teenager, showing him his own scars, building a bridge with his bare hands. Somewhere in a small apartment, a sus chef was holding his infant son and promising to always tell the truth, even when it was hard. Somewhere on a quiet street in Newark, A rusted Ford F-150 sat in a driveway, and a toolbox wrapped in duct tape sat by a garage door, and a man with long dark hair and kind brown eyes was getting ready to do what he always did. Show up. Keep promises. Build bridges. Choose grace, because in the end, that is all any of us can do. Not erase the scars. Not undo the pain. Not pretend the world is fair or kind or just. But choose, every single day, to be better than the worst thing that was ever done to us. To look at cruelty and see the broken child underneath. To look at a stranger and see a human being. To look at a scrap of paper with 6 desperate words and see the most powerful force in the universe. Courage. The courage to do the right thing. Even when it costs everything. The meridian stayed open. The note stayed on the wall. The promise stayed alive. And every person who walked through those doors, rich or poor, dressed up or dressed down, powerful or powerless, was greeted with the same 6 words that Jack Holloway had believed in with his whole heart and that his daughter now carried forward in his name. Welcome. You are exactly where you belong. Thank you for following this story. Let us know in the comments below if this story has moved you and you would like to stand with us in bringing more voices of truth and hope to light. Please consider supporting our work. Even the smallest gift helps us continue creating and sharing these powerful stories. You can find the donate link in the description. And of course, do not forget to subscribe so you will not miss the next chapter we are preparing for you.